Thea couldn't believe her eyes as she stared at her belongings piled haphazardly on the porch, soaked by the pouring rain. Her phone buzzed with a text from Archer, breaking their engagement in just 8 cold words. Behind her mother stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "Time to grow up and leave the nest," her mother said, choosing her new husband and his spoiled kids over her own daughter. Her stepsister Brianni smirked from behind, already wearing Thea's favorite sweater. They had taken everything, her fiancé, her home, her dignity. What they forgot was that the house, the business, and every acre of land belonged to Thea. Her grandmother had left it all to her. Her name was on every deed, every account, every code. They thought they'd kicked her out of her life. They had no idea what was coming. Thea Marlowe sipped her coffee at the kitchen island, watching her mother flit around the room like a hummingbird. Elizabeth Marlowe Reynolds was buzzing with energy as she prepared breakfast for her new husband and his 2 adult children. The smell of Belgian waffles filled the air, a recipe Elizabeth never bothered to make when it was just Thea and her. "Honey, could you set the table? Gerald likes the blue plates and Brianni prefers the cloth napkins," Elizabeth said without looking up from the waffle iron. 3 months into this new blended family experiment, and Thea still felt like an outsider in her own childhood home. The sprawling Victorian house had been her grandmother's pride and joy before she passed away 2 years ago, leaving it to Thea along with the family business, a successful local publishing company that had been in their family for generations. "Sure, Mom," Thea replied, reaching for the plates. At 27, she had moved back home temporarily after finishing her master's degree, planning to save money before she and Archer, her fiancé of 2 years, bought their own place. Then her mother had met Gerald Reynolds, a charismatic widower with 2 children Thea's age, and everything changed at lightning speed. The sound of footsteps on the stairs announced the arrival of the rest of the household. Gerald entered first, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, his silver hair perfectly coiffed. He pecked Elizabeth on the cheek before taking his seat at the head of the table, a position that had been empty since Thea's father died when she was 14. "Morning, all," Gerald said with his practiced smile. "Thea, is Archer joining us today?" Before Thea could answer, Brianni sauntered in, dressed in what appeared to be loungewear but probably cost more than Thea's entire wardrobe. At 29, Brianni had built a moderately successful career as a lifestyle influencer, though Thea suspected most of her luxurious lifestyle was still bankrolled by her father. "Archer texted me. He's running late but said not to wait," Brianni announced, somehow knowing details about Thea's fiancé that Thea herself didn't. Thea felt her stomach tighten. Lately, Archer had been spending more time at the house when she wasn't around, supposedly using the home studio to work on compositions for his growing career. Once a humble music teacher at the local high school, Archer had recently gained minor celebrity status after one of his compositions went viral in a popular streaming series. "How would you know that?" Thea asked, trying to keep her voice light. Brianni flashed a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We follow each other on social. He mentioned he was stopping by the studio today, so I offered to help with some publicity shots for his new release. I have a good eye for that sort of thing." The explanation made sense, but something in Brianni's tone made Thea uneasy. She'd noticed lately how Brianni seemed to light up whenever Archer was around, how she'd touch his arm when laughing at his jokes, how she'd mention musical references that seemed researched rather than genuine. Thea's thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of Preston, Gerald's son, who at 32 still lived at home despite his supposed job as an investment consultant. He nodded at the room in general before burying himself in his phone. "Elizabeth, these waffles are divine," Gerald gushed after his first bite. "You know, before I met your mother, Brianni and Preston had never experienced a real family breakfast. Their mother was always too busy with her social obligations." Elizabeth beamed under the praise, while Thea fought the urge to roll her eyes. Gerald never missed an opportunity to paint his late wife as cold and neglectful, justifying why his children still needed so much parental support well into adulthood. Speaking of breakfast, Elizabeth turned to Thea. Could you use the smaller coffee mug, dear? We need to save the large ones for when Gerald's business associates visit later. Thea looked down at the mug that had been hers since high school, a gift from her grandmother. This is my mug, Mom. I always use this one. Don't be selfish, Thea, Elizabeth said with a tightness in her voice that had become increasingly common. We all need to make adjustments as a family. Family. The word stuck in Thea's throat like a fish bone. This didn't feel like family. It felt like an invasion. After breakfast, Thea retreated to the garden, the one place in the house that still felt like hers. Her phone buzzed with a text from Archer. Can't make dinner tonight, working late. It was the third canceled date this week. Thea stared at her engagement ring, a modest diamond that had felt so meaningful when he'd proposed on the pier where they'd had their first date. Now it felt like it was shrinking, just like her place in her own home. That evening, Thea returned early from her shift at the publishing company. The house was unusually quiet. Gerald's car was gone, and Preston had mentioned a business dinner. Her mother was at her weekly book club, which meant she should have the house to herself, a rare luxury these days. As she walked past the studio, she heard the faint sound of piano music, followed by laughter, distinctly Brianni's. Thea paused, then quietly pushed the door open. What she saw froze her in place. Archer sat at the piano, but Brianni wasn't watching him play. She was perched on his lap, her arms wrapped around his neck, their lips locked in a kiss that was clearly not their first. What is this? Thea's voice sounded strange to her own ears, hollow and distant. They sprang apart, Archer's face draining of color while Brianni's flushed pink, more with excitement than embarrassment. Thea, I can explain, Archer started, but Thea was already backing away. How long? She managed to ask. Brianni stood up, straightening her designer dress. Long enough for him to realize who he really wants to be with. Someone who understands his new world, who can help his career instead of holding him back. Is that true? Thea asked Archer, who couldn't meet her eyes. Thea, you know I care about you, but things have changed. I'm changing. My career is taking off, and I need someone who can move in those circles with me. Someone like Brianni. Yes, he admitted. I was going to tell you. We were going to tell you properly. 3 hours later, the entire household had assembled in the living room like some twisted family tribunal. Gerald stood protectively behind his daughter, while Elizabeth sat wringing her hands, her eyes darting between her daughter and her stepdaughter. This is for the best, Thea, her mother finally said. You and Archer were high school sweethearts. That rarely works out in the long run. You're taking their side? Thea couldn't believe what she was hearing. He cheated on me with her in our home, and you're acting like I'm the problem? No one is saying you're the problem, Gerald interjected smoothly. But your reaction has been concerning. The yelling, the accusations, Brianni feels unsafe. Brianni nodded, tears miraculously appearing in her eyes. I never meant to hurt you, Thea. These things just happen sometimes. Things don't just happen, Thea said, her voice rising. People make choices. You both made choices to betray me, and now my own mother is choosing you over me. Elizabeth stood up then, her face hardening in a way Thea had never seen before. That's enough, Thea. I think it would be best if you moved out for a while. Give everyone some space. You're 27 years old. It's time to grow up and leave the nest anyway. The words hit Thea like physical blows. You want me to leave? This is my house too. Actually, Gerald said, Elizabeth and I have been discussing the future of this property. As the husband and primary provider now, it makes sense for the deed to be transferred to both our names, for estate planning purposes. Thea looked at her mother in disbelief. You're trying to take Grandma's house, the house she left to me. No one is taking anything, Elizabeth said firmly. But this hostility needs to stop. Pack your things, Thea. You need some time away to cool down. And just like that, Thea Marlowe found herself standing on the porch of her own home, a duffel bag at her feet, watching through the window as her mother comforted the woman who had stolen her fiancé. They had taken everything from her in a single night, forgetting one crucial detail. The house, the land, the business they were all living in and profiting from, it was all legally hers. Every deed, every account, every code, they thought they had cast her out. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The rain started just as Thea reached the sidewalk. A sudden downpour that quickly soaked through her light jacket and the single duffel bag containing what little she'd managed to grab. Her fingers trembled as she pulled out her phone, scrolling through contacts for someone, anyone, who might take her in. Most of her friends had scattered after college, and the few local ones had been mutual friends with Archer, people who would inevitably ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. How do you explain that your mother chose her new husband's daughter over you? That your fiancé had been carrying on an affair under your own roof? That you'd been kicked out of the house your grandmother had specifically left to you? A car splashed by, sending muddy water across her shoes. Thea looked up at the house, her house, where the lights of the living room glowed warmly. She could see shadows moving inside, life continuing as if she had never been part of it. Her phone buzzed with a text from Archer. Left some of your things by the garage. Sorry it ended this way. Sorry it ended this way. As if their engagement, their 5 years together, their plans and promises had been a business arrangement that simply hadn't worked out. As if he hadn't betrayed her in the most intimate way possible, Thea walked to the garage, finding a trash bag with some of her clothes and a few books haphazardly stuffed inside. One of the books was a leather-bound volume of poetry her grandmother had given her, now warped from moisture. She clutched it to her chest, the final indignity breaking something loose inside her. She made it 3 blocks before collapsing onto a bus stop bench, her body shaking with sobs that tore through her chest. The rain continued to fall, washing away her tears but not the hollow ache spreading through her body. After what felt like hours, a familiar car slowed alongside her. The window rolled down to reveal Ava Chen, Thea's friend from high school who had gone on to become a corporate attorney. Thea, is that you? What are you doing out here in this weather? Thea looked up, her face streaked with mascara and rain. Ava, 5 minutes later, Thea sat in the passenger seat of Ava's sensible sedan, a fleece blanket wrapped around her shoulders as the heater blasted warm air. I was on my way back from a client dinner, Ava explained, glancing worriedly at her friend. Want to tell me what's going on? The story spilled out of Thea in disjointed pieces, each revelation causing Ava's expression to harden further. By the time Thea finished, they were parked outside Ava's downtown apartment, and Ava was gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles had turned white. Let me get this straight, Ava said, her attorney voice taking over. They kicked you out of the house your grandmother left to you? The house that's in your name? Thea nodded miserably. Mom said Gerald wants to transfer the deed for estate planning purposes, whatever that means. I think they've already been treating it like it's theirs. Renovating rooms, changing things. And the business, the publishing company? I've been working there since graduation, but Mom has been running it day to day. She kept saying we'd transition management to me when I was ready. I never pushed because I trusted her. Ava turned to face her fully. Thea, they can't just take your inheritance. If your grandmother left the house and business to you specifically, it's legally yours. It doesn't matter, Thea said, too exhausted to feel the anger that had propelled her this far. They made it clear I'm not welcome there anymore. Mom chose them. Archer chose Briani. It matters, Ava insisted, a fierce protectiveness in her voice. It matters because it's yours and no one has the right to take it from you or push you out. But first things first, let's get you inside, dry and fed. Then we can talk options. The next morning, Thea awoke on Ava's pull-out couch, momentarily disoriented before the events of the previous night came rushing back. She reached for her phone, finding several missed calls from her mother but nothing from Archer. There was, however, a text from an unknown number. Hope you found somewhere warm to stay. Sorry about your engagement. If you need your stuff, let me know and I'll leave it somewhere for you to pick up. Briani. The casual cruelty of it, the assumption that Thea would slink away and disappear from their lives, ignited a spark of defiance in her chest. They thought she was defeated, broken, gone, but Thea came from stronger stock than they knew. Her grandmother, Alina Marlowe, had built the publishing company from nothing after her husband died young, raising Elizabeth alone while growing a business that became respected throughout the region. Alina had recognized something in Thea that she hadn't seen in her own daughter, a quiet strength and business acumen that mirrored her own. That's why she had left everything to Thea, not Elizabeth. Ava emerged from her bedroom already dressed in a sharp pantsuit, hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. I made coffee and cleared my morning. Let's talk strategy. Over the next 2 hours, Ava laid out exactly what rights Thea had and what actions she could take immediately. The house, the business, the land, all of it was legally hers. She could demand they vacate immediately. She could call the police and report them for trespassing. She could shut down their access to the business accounts, but something in Thea resisted the direct approach. The idea of walking back in with legal papers and demands felt somehow insufficient. They had humiliated her, betrayed her, discarded her. Simple eviction seemed too clean, too quick for what they had done. I need time, Thea finally said. I need to think about what I want to do next. Ava nodded slowly. Time might actually work in your favor. They think you're gone, which means they'll get comfortable. They might even make mistakes, especially if they try to move forward with changing deeds or accessing accounts they shouldn't. Later that day, Thea checked into a small hotel on the outskirts of town, paying cash for a week's stay. She needed space away from everyone, even Ava's well-intentioned legal strategies. She needed to process what had happened and decide who she wanted to be on the other side of this betrayal. The hotel room was sparse but clean, anonymous in a way that felt soothing after the emotional violence of the past 24 hours. Thea sat cross-legged on the bed, her grandmother's leather journal open beside her. The leaner had kept detailed notes about the business, about her philosophies on life and success, about the legacy she wanted to leave. One passage in particular caught Thea's eye. Power isn't about force or volume. Real power lies in knowing when to wait, when to watch, and when to act with such precision that your opponent never saw you coming. Thea closed the journal, a calmness settling over her for the first time since she'd walked in on Archer and Briani. They thought they had won. They thought she was gone for good, cast out and forgot. The perfect victim. They think I'm gone, Thea whispered to the empty room. Good, let them. For the next 3 days, Thea hardly left her hotel room. She ordered delivery, slept fitfully, and avoided checking social media where she knew Briani would be crafting the narrative of what had happened. On the 4th day, she checked out, withdrew a significant amount from her personal savings account, and bought a one-way ticket to Seattle, where a college friend had offered her a place to stay while she figured things out. As the plane lifted off, Thea looked down at the shrinking landscape of the only town she'd ever called home. Somewhere down there, her mother and Gerald were probably discussing how to transfer the house into their names. Archer and Briani were likely planning their future together in the music studio that had once been Thea's sanctuary. They were celebrating their victory, unaware that they had created something far more dangerous than a jilted daughter or ex-fiancé. They had created a woman with nothing left to lose. Seattle greeted Thea with relentless rain that matched her mood. Her college friend Mara worked as a software engineer for a tech company and lived in a modern apartment building with floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the Space Needle. The city felt appropriately distant from her old life, a place where no one knew her as the girl who got dumped for her stepsister. Stay as long as you need, Mara said, showing Thea to the spare bedroom. The tech bros around here drive me crazy. Having a friend to hang out with will be great. Thea nodded gratefully, but they both knew this arrangement wasn't permanent. Thea needed to rebuild herself from the ground up, and doing that in someone else's space, even a friend's, wasn't going to work. 2 weeks later, Thea signed a lease on a small studio apartment in a converted warehouse building. The space was industrial, all exposed brick and pipes, nothing like the Victorian warmth of her grandmother's house. It felt right somehow. A blank canvas. On her first night alone, Thea opened her laptop and did something she'd been avoiding since her departure. She checked her email. Among the spam and newsletters were several messages from her mother, their subject lines growing increasingly concerned. "Where are you? Please call me. We need to talk about the house." The last one caught her eye. She clicked it open. "Thea, I don't know where you are, but we need to discuss the house and business situation. Gerald has consulted with an attorney who says that since you've abandoned the property, we can petition for a transfer of ownership. Please contact me immediately. Mom." abandoned the property, as if she'd left voluntarily, as if she hadn't been thrown out into the rain with a duffel bag and the clothes on her back. Thea closed the email without responding and opened a new browser window. She typed digital forensic certificate programs into the search bar. Over the next month, Thea maintained radio silence with her family while methodically rebuilding her life. She found a job as an administrative assistant at a local publishing company, a position far below her qualifications, but one that allowed her to observe how a successful modern publishing operation worked. In the evenings, she took online courses in business law and digital security. She changed her appearance, cutting her long blonde hair into a sleek bob and dyeing it a rich, dark brown. She traded her soft, feminine wardrobe for structured blazers and crisp button-downs. The transformation wasn't about disguise, it was about armor. Each change put another layer between the broken girl who'd been discarded and the woman who was gradually taking shape. Ava checked in regularly, keeping Thea informed about what was happening back home. Gerald and Elizabeth had indeed consulted an attorney about claiming ownership of the house based on abandonment, but without Thea's signature on any transfer documents, they couldn't proceed legally. Meanwhile, Elizabeth continued to run the publishing company, apparently unaware that Thea still had access to all the business accounts and could see every transaction. "They're bleeding the business," Ava reported during one of their weekly calls. "Elizabeth is drawing a much larger salary than before, and there are payments going to consultants that seem suspicious." "Let them," Thea replied, her voice calm. For now. As weeks turned into months, Thea began to assemble a detailed picture of what was happening in her absence. She created alerts that notified her whenever her name appeared in any legal documents in her home county. She set up dummy social media accounts to monitor Brianni's increasingly lavish posts, many featuring Archer, whose music career seemed to be benefiting from Brianni's connections and constant promotion. One evening, as Thea was reviewing some financial statements from the publishing company, she noticed a large payment to a marketing firm she didn't recognize. A quick search revealed it was a shell company registered to Preston Reynolds, Gerald's son. They were siphoning money from her grandmother's company into their own pockets. Most people would have reacted with immediate outrage. They would have called an attorney, filed charges, demanded justice in the heat of discovery. But Thea had learned patience. She documented the transfer, added it to her growing file of evidence, and continued watching. 6 months after her departure, Thea received a notification that Brianni had tagged a new post with Archer's handle. It was a photo of them in front of the house, Brianni's left hand prominently displayed with an engagement ring that looked suspiciously like a larger version of the one Archer had given Thea. The caption read, "Said yes to forever in our dream home, wedding planning mode activated. #love bright shines my house forever home my house." The audacity of it might have broken Thea once. Now it only confirmed what she already knew. They had forgotten she existed, forgotten that the ground beneath their feet belonged to her. By the 8-month mark, Thea had completed her digital forensic certification and was halfway through a business law program. She had saved enough from her job to hire a private investigator, who delivered weekly reports on the activities of the Reynolds-Marlowe household and Archer's professional movements. What emerged was a picture of people who believed they had gotten away with their betrayal. Elizabeth and Gerald were planning extensive renovations to the house. Brianni's influencer career was booming, with sponsorship deals that seemed to materialize overnight. Archer had landed a soundtrack deal for an upcoming streaming series, his first major professional breakthrough. They were thriving, building their futures on the foundation Thea's grandmother had created, never once acknowledging the woman they had cast aside. Mara noticed the change in Thea first. "You seem different lately," she commented during one of their occasional dinners. More centered, Thea considered this. "I am different. For a while I was just surviving, going through the motions. Now I have purpose." "Is that purpose getting back at them?" Mara asked carefully. No, Thea smiled slightly. It's about reclaiming what's mine, but properly this time, not just the house or the business, but my power. In her 10th month away, Thea received two pieces of news that crystallized her next steps. First, the private investigator reported that Gerald and Elizabeth had attempted to secure a loan using the house as collateral, but had been denied due to the unclear ownership status. Second, Ava called with news that the local newspaper was planning a feature on the publishing company's upcoming 50th anniversary, with Elizabeth being portrayed as the woman carrying on the family legacy. That night, Thea opened her grandmother's journal again, finding a passage she'd read dozens of times since her arrival in Seattle. Business isn't personal except when it is. When someone betrays your trust, don't get mad, get methodical. Methodical. That had been Alina Marlowe's greatest strength. She hadn't built her company through dramatic gestures or emotional decisions. She had planned carefully, moved strategically, and struck when the moment was right. The next day, Thea booked a flight home, not as the discarded daughter returning with her tail between her legs, but as the legal owner of property worth millions, armed with evidence of financial misconduct and a strategy that had been nearly a year in the making. She scheduled her arrival for the day of the publishing company's anniversary gala, an event her mother had been planning for months, according to the company emails Thea still had access to. It would be the perfect moment to reintroduce herself to the community that had watched her disappear without explanation. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" Ava asked when Thea called to let her know the plan. "I'm not the same person who left," Thea replied, catching her reflection in the window. The woman who looked back at her was poised, polished, and utterly unrecognizable from the heartbroken girl who'd boarded a plane nearly a year ago. They won't know what hit them. The night before Thea's return, a bombshell dropped on social media. An anonymous account posted documented evidence that Brianni Reynolds, rising lifestyle influencer, had purchased over 800,000 of her 1.2 million followers. Screenshots of bank transfers, communications with Click Farms, and detailed analytics painted an undeniable picture of fraud. Alongside this evidence were copies of several sponsorship contracts in which Brianni had explicitly guaranteed authentic engagement metrics. Within hours, Brianni's phone was blowing up with messages from furious brand partners threatening legal action. Her most recent post, a carefully staged photo of her and Archer toasting with champagne in the music studio, was flooded with comments from real followers expressing their disappointment and brands publicly severing ties. Thea watched it unfold from her hotel room across town, the glow of her laptop illuminating her face as notification after notification signaled the collapse of Brianni's carefully constructed facade. She hadn't triggered this exposure out of pure vindictiveness. The money Brianni had used to purchase those fake followers had come directly from the publishing company's marketing budget, funneled through Preston's Shell Corporation. Brianni had stolen from Thea's inheritance to build her counterfeit career. The timing was deliberate, calculated to create maximum chaos on the eve of the publishing company's gala. Elizabeth would be distracted by damage control, trying to protect the family's reputation just as she was set to be celebrated as the torchbearer of the Marlowe legacy. The second strike came just hours later. A music industry blog published a detailed account of a past relationship between Archer Brighton and a former student, complete with screenshots of inappropriate messages sent while she was still in high school. The student, now a college graduate, had decided to come forward after seeing Archer's rising profile. She hadn't gone to Thea with this information. She'd taken it directly to a journalist known for covering misconduct in the entertainment industry. By morning, Archer's name was trending for all the wrong reasons. The soundtrack deal that had been his big break was suddenly in jeopardy as producers distanced themselves from the controversy. His carefully cultivated image as a sensitive, artistic soul was crumbling under allegations that he had a pattern of pursuing vulnerable young women. Thea felt no satisfaction as she read through the coverage. The young woman's account confirmed suspicions Thea had dismissed during their relationship, moments when Archer's explanations had seemed just plausible enough to silence her instincts. She hadn't exposed Archer, she had simply stopped protecting him from his own actions. She dressed carefully for the gala, selecting a black sheath dress that conveyed both elegance and authority. Her now dark hair was pulled back in a sleek chignon, her makeup minimal but precise. The woman in the mirror bore little resemblance to the soft, trusting Thea who had been thrown out of her own home. This version of herself was all clean lines and sharp edges. The Marlowe Publishing Anniversary Gala was being held at the Grand Hotel downtown, the same venue where Thea's grandmother had celebrated the company's 25th anniversary. Thea timed her arrival for precisely 30 minutes after the event began, when most guests would be present but before any speeches or presentations. As she approached the hotel, her phone buzzed with a text from Ava. "Everything in place. Legal team on standby. Good luck." The ballroom was decorated in the company's signature colors, with enlarged covers of their most successful books displayed on easels around the perimeter. Thea spotted her mother immediately, standing near the podium in an expensive dress that Thea recognized as new, likely purchased with company funds. Elizabeth appeared strained, her smile tight as she conversed with a board member. Gerald was at her side, one hand possessively on her back as he charmed an elderly patron. Brianni was notably absent, undoubtedly dealing with the fallout from the previous night's revelations. Preston hovered near the bar, looking bored and slightly drunk already. Thea moved through the crowd unnoticed at first, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. She positioned herself directly in her mother's line of sight and waited. The moment Elizabeth spotted her daughter was almost cinematic. Her glass froze halfway to her lips, her eyes widened, and her practiced smile slipped completely. She whispered something urgent to Gerald, whose head snapped up to locate the threat when they approached. It was Gerald who spoke first, his voice low and tense. "What are you doing here?" "It's my company's anniversary," Thea replied coolly. "Where else would I be?" Elizabeth glanced around nervously. "Thea, this isn't the place for a scene. We thought you were gone." "Clearly." Thea took a deliberate sip of her champagne. "Yet here I am just in time to hear about how you've been carrying on my grandmother's legacy." The color drained from Elizabeth's face. "How did you know about the speech?" "I know everything, Mom. Every unauthorized transfer from the company accounts. Every attempt to transfer the deed to the house. Every penny Preston's fake consulting firm has siphoned away. I even know about the loan you tried to take out using property that isn't yours as collateral. That's fraud, by the way." Gerald stepped closer, his charm replaced by barely contained anger. "Now you listen here. You abandoned your responsibilities. You left without a word. Elizabeth has kept this company going while you were off having some kind of breakdown." "Is that the story you've been telling, Mom? That I had a breakdown?" Elizabeth at least had the decency to look ashamed. People were asking questions. It was simpler than explaining the complicated truth. The truth that you chose your new husband and his children over your own daughter. That you threw me out of a house that legally belongs to me. That truth. Several nearby guests had stopped their conversations to watch the tense exchange. Elizabeth noticed and plastered on a bright smile. "Thea, darling, why don't we discuss this privately? I'm about to give my speech." "By all means," Thea gestured toward the podium. "Don't let me stop you from taking credit for Grandma's life's work." As Elizabeth moved toward the stage, visibly shaken, Thea circulated through the room, greeting old friends and business associates who expressed surprise and delight at seeing her again. She answered their curious questions with vague references to an extended sabbatical, watching over the rim of her glass as her mother nervously adjusted the microphone. Elizabeth's speech started smoothly enough, with practice thanks to the board members and key clients. Then she began to talk about the Marlowe legacy, her voice catching as she glanced at Thea. "My mother, Eleanor Marlowe, built this company on principles of integrity and excellence. She always said that publishing was about giving voice to stories that needed to be told. Today, as we celebrate 50 years of Marlowe Publishing, I am proud to continue that tradition as the steward of her legacy. Thea felt a flare of anger so intense it momentarily blinded her. Steward of her legacy. Eleanor had explicitly chosen not to leave the company to Elizabeth, recognizing something in her daughter that Thea was only now beginning to fully understand. The selfishness. The willingness to sacrifice others for her own comfort. As applause filled the room, Thea slipped out a side door, pulling her phone from her clutch. A series of text messages awaited her confirmation before the final phase of her plan could begin. She had intended to wait until after the gala to give her mother one last night of pretending, but the speech had changed things. Some lies could not be allowed to stand. Thea sent a single word to her attorney. Now. Within minutes, Elizabeth's phone began to ring. She glanced at it distractedly before silencing it and returning to a conversation with a donor. Then Gerald's phone rang, followed by a text that made him blanch visibly. He leaned in to whisper something urgent to Elizabeth, whose face contorted in alarm. They both looked around frantically for Thea, who had positioned herself near the exit. When their eyes met across the room, Thea raised her glass in a mock toast before walking out, knowing they would follow. In the quiet of the hotel corridor, Elizabeth confronted her daughter, panic evident in her voice. "What have you done? The attorney says there's a court order freezing all the company accounts and an eviction notice for the house. This is insanity, Thea." No, Thea's voice was steady. "Insanity was thinking you could steal my inheritance and get away with it. The court orders are just the beginning. I have documented every unauthorized transfer, every misappropriation of company funds, including the money used to buy Brianni's fake followers." Gerald stepped forward, his face flushed with anger. "You destroyed my daughter's career. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I exposed her fraud," Thea corrected him. "Just like I'm exposing yours. Did you really think I wouldn't notice you funneling my company's money through Preston's fake consulting firm? Or that you forged my signature on preliminary paperwork for transferring the house deed?" Elizabeth reached for her daughter's arm. "Thea, please, we can work this out as a family. We stopped being family the night you chose them over me, the night you threw me out of my own house. You left us no choice," Gerald insisted. "Your behavior was erratic. You were making wild accusations." "Which turned out to be completely true," Thea pointed out. "Archer was cheating with Brianni, under my roof. In the studio my grandmother built for me." Elizabeth's expression hardened. "And now you've come back for revenge, is that it? You've ruined Brianni's reputation, tanked Archer's career, and now you want to punish us too? This isn't revenge, Mom, it's justice. Everything I've done has simply been to reclaim what's legally mine and expose actions that were already wrong. I didn't make Brianni buy fake followers. I didn't force Archer to pursue a student. I didn't make you embezzle from the company or attempt to steal my house." Gerald's face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful little—" "I wouldn't finish that sentence," Thea cut him off calmly. "Not when I'm the one holding all the cards. As of 10 minutes ago, I have officially resumed control of Marlowe Publishing. The board has been notified of the financial irregularities under your management. And as for the house, you have exactly 48 hours to vacate the premises." Elizabeth's composure finally broke. "You can't do this. Where are we supposed to go?" "That's not my problem," Thea replied, the words her mother had essentially said to her a year ago landing with precision. "I suggest you grow up and figure it out." The 48-hour deadline Thea had given her family came and went with a flurry of desperate phone calls and legal threats. Gerald had hired an attorney who sent strongly worded emails claiming emotional distress and implied ownership through financial contributions to the property. Thea forwarded each one directly to Ava, who responded with clinical precision about the ironclad nature of the inheritance and the documented evidence of attempted fraud. Elizabeth shifted tactics between anger and pleading, leaving voicemails that ranged from tearful apologies to bitter accusations. "You're punishing me for finding happiness," she said in one particularly dramatic message. "Is that what your grandmother would have wanted?" The invocation of Eleanor Marlowe only strengthened Thea's resolve. Her grandmother had seen something in Elizabeth that had led her to bypass her own daughter in her will, entrusting the family legacy to Thea instead. Now Thea understood why on the morning of the third day, Thea arrived at the house accompanied by a locksmith, a security specialist, and Ava. She had given the family ample time to remove their personal belongings, and now it was time to reclaim the property completely. The house stood silent and seemingly empty, the carefully tended garden beds her grandmother had loved now overgrown with weeds. Thea unlocked the front door with her key, stepping into the familiar entryway with its sweeping staircase and stained glass window that cast multicolored light across the hardwood floor. She moved through each room methodically, cataloging the changes made in her absence. The living room furniture had been replaced with sleeker, more modern pieces. Her grandmother's antique writing desk, a cherished family heirloom, was nowhere to be seen. The music studio had been expanded, presumably for Archer's use, with expensive equipment that certainly hadn't been there when Thea left. In what had once been Thea's bedroom, she found Brianni's influencer setup. Ring lights, a professional camera on a tripod, and a clothing rack full of items still bearing tags, likely freebies from sponsorship deals that would never materialize now. They've cleared out most of their personal items, Ava noted, checking off rooms on her tablet. But they've left a lot of the new furniture and equipment. Legally, anything they leave behind becomes mine after the eviction deadline, Thea replied. They knew that. The locksmith had finished changing the main locks and was programming a new security system when Thea's phone rang with an unknown number. She answered cautiously. "Is this Thea Marlowe?" A man's voice unfamiliar. "Yes, who's calling?" "This is Detective Morgan with the county sheriff's office. I have a Gerald Reynolds here who's claiming you've illegally seized his property. Says you changed the locks on his house." Thea caught Ava's eye and put the phone on speaker. "That's interesting, Detective, considering I'm the legal owner of the property in question. I have the deed and title right here if you'd like me to email them to you." There was a pause, then the sound of muffled conversation. "Ma'am, Mr. Reynolds is quite insistent. He says he's been living there for over a year and has made significant financial investments in the property. Without my permission or knowledge," Thea clarified. "I've been away for nearly a year, during which time Mr. Reynolds, his children, and my mother attempted to transfer the deed to their names illegally. I have documentation of forged signatures and fraudulent loan applications using this property as collateral. My attorney is present if you'd like to speak with her." Another pause, longer this time. "That won't be necessary, Ms. Marlowe. It seems Mr. Reynolds has been less than forthcoming about the situation. I apologize for the disturbance." After hanging up, Thea turned to Ava. "They're getting desperate." "Good," Ava replied, her expression grim. "They should be." By afternoon, the house was secure with new locks, a state-of-the-art security system, and cameras monitoring the perimeter. Thea stood in the kitchen, running her hand along the marble countertop her grandmother had installed during the last renovation she would oversee before her death. "What are you going to do with it?" Ava asked, watching her friend from the doorway. "Move back in." Thea shook her head slowly. "No, the idea of living in these rooms again, with all their memories both good and bad, held no appeal. I have other plans." Those plans began to take shape the following day when Thea met with a real estate attorney specializing in property donations. The house, with its sprawling grounds and prime location, was worth considerably more than when her grandmother had left it to her. The renovations Gerald and Elizabeth had overseen, despite being done without her consent, had actually increased the property value significantly. "You're sure about this?" the attorney asked, reviewing the paperwork Thea had presented. "A donation of this magnitude is quite exceptional." "I'm sure," Thea confirmed. "My grandmother always supported the women's shelter, though few people knew it. This is what she would have wanted." While the donation paperwork was being processed, Thea turned her attention to Marlowe Publishing. The board had been understandably concerned about the sudden change in leadership and the allegations against Elizabeth's management. Thea arranged a meeting to present her vision for the company's future, drawing heavily on the principles her grandmother had outlined in her journals. Marlowe Publishing has always been about amplifying important voices, she told the assembled board members. In recent years, we've drifted from that mission. I intend to refocus our efforts on quality over quantity, integrity over profit margins. To her surprise, the board responded enthusiastically to her proposal. Several members confided that they had been concerned about the direction Elizabeth had been taking the company, with its emphasis on celebrity memoirs and quick turnaround trend books. As Thea settled into her role as president of Marlowe Publishing, news of her return and the dramatic ousting of her family spread through the community. She ignored the gossip, focusing instead on rebuilding what had nearly been lost during her absence. The final confrontation came a week after Thea had reclaimed the house. She was working late at the publishing office when Elizabeth appeared in the doorway, looking haggard and unkempt, a far cry from the polished woman who had thrown her daughter out a year before. "You've destroyed everything," Elizabeth said without preamble. "Are you happy now?" Thea looked up from her computer, studying the woman who had once been the center of her world. "I haven't destroyed anything, Mom. I've reclaimed what was taken from me." "We're living in a hotel," Elizabeth continued, her voice brittle. "Gerald's business partners are distancing themselves because of the fraud allegations. Brianni can barely show her face online without being attacked. Even Preston had to shut down his consulting firm. You've ruined us all." "You ruined yourselves," Thea corrected her gently. "Each of you made choices that led to this moment. I simply stopped protecting you from the consequences of those choices." Elizabeth sank into a chair, suddenly looking every one of her 57 years. "What happens now? Do you just erase us from your life completely?" "That's what you did to me," Thea pointed out. "The night you chose Gerald and Brianni over your own daughter. The night you threw me out of my own home. I never thought you'd actually leave town," Elizabeth admitted. "I thought you'd stay with a friend for a few days, cool off, and then we'd work things out. Like I'd come crawling back, begging to be allowed back into the home that legally belongs to me, the company my grandmother built." Elizabeth had the grace to look ashamed. "We got carried away. Gerald convinced me that you weren't ready for the responsibility, that you were too emotional, too attached to the past. And now I have nothing," Elizabeth said simply. "Gerald is talking about returning to Boston, where his first wife's family has property. He says there's nothing left for him here." Thea felt a complex mixture of emotions: satisfaction that justice had been served, sadness for what had been lost, and a surprising sense of freedom. Her mother's approval, which she had sought for so long, no longer seemed important. "I'm donating the house," Thea said finally, "to the women's shelter Grandma supported. The paperwork should be finalized by the end of the month." Elizabeth looked genuinely shocked. "You're giving away the house, but it's been in our family for generations. And it will continue to shelter and protect people who need it," Thea replied. "Just not us." A strange expression crossed Elizabeth's face, something between pride and regret. "You really are your grandmother's granddaughter. She would have done exactly the same thing." The next morning, Thea received a text from an unknown number. "Is it true you're selling the house? Where am I supposed to live now? Brianni." Thea stared at the message, marveling at the sheer entitlement it displayed. After everything that had happened, Brianni still somehow saw herself as entitled to a place in the house she had helped take from Thea. Rather than respond, Thea blocked the number and continued with her day. Later that week, as Thea was overseeing the removal of the remaining furniture from the house in preparation for the shelter to take ownership, a familiar car pulled into the driveway. Archer stepped out, looking thinner and more disheveled than when she'd last seen him, the polished veneer of the rising musician notably absent. "I heard you were back," he said, keeping his distance on the porch steps. "And that you're giving the house away. News travels fast," Thea observed neutrally. "Brianni and I broke up," he continued, as if this information might matter to her. "After everything came out about her fake followers and my past mistakes. We've both been cancelled effectively." "That must be difficult for you," Thea said, not bothering to inject much sympathy into her tone. Archer ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she had once found endearing. "I know I have no right to ask, but is there any chance we could talk? Really talk? about what happened about us. A year ago, those words might have broken through her defenses, might have stirred the hope that he still cared, that there was something to salvage. Now they simply confirmed how little he understood about what he had done. There is no us, Archer. There hasn't been since the night I found you with Briani in my grandmother's studio. The night my mother chose her new family over me. I made a terrible mistake, he insisted. We all did. But people deserve second chances, don't they? Thea looked at him, really looked at him, and saw for the first time how small he actually was. Not physically, but in spirit, in character, in all the ways that truly mattered. Some mistakes can't be undone, she said finally. Some betrayals cut too deep. This isn't about punishment or revenge. It's about recognizing that some bridges once burned can't be rebuilt. As Archer drove away, Thea turned back to the house, to the empty rooms that would soon be filled with women and children searching for safety and new beginnings. In a strange way, she and the house had parallel journeys, both violated, both written off, both finding purpose beyond what anyone had imagined possible. The property transfer was scheduled for the following day, a simple legal procedure that would transform a family estate into a community resource. Thea felt lighter with each box removed, each piece of furniture donated, each trace of her former life cleared away to make room for something new. That evening, as sunset painted the western windows in shades of gold and amber, Thea sat on the porch swing her grandfather had built decades ago, one of the few original features that had survived the recent renovations. She held her grandmother's journal in her lap, open to a page she had read countless times over the past year. True power isn't about controlling others, Alina had written. It's about knowing exactly who you are and what you stand for, even when everyone else has forgotten. The morning of the property transfer dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect spring day that seemed made for new beginnings. Thea arrived at the house early, walking the grounds one last time, saying goodbye to the place that had shaped so much of her life. The rose bushes her grandmother had lovingly tended were beginning to bud, promising blooms that Alina would never see but that would bring beauty to the women and children who would soon call this place home. Inside, the house had been cleared of personal belongings, the spaces open and ready for their new purpose. The shelter's director, Marion Powell, was scheduled to arrive at 10 for the official signing, along with the board members and a small contingent of local press. Thea had initially been reluctant about media coverage, but Marion had convinced her that the story might inspire other property owners to consider similar donations. "Ms. Marlowe?" A voice called from the front door, which Thea had left open to the spring breeze. "We're a little early, I hope that's all right." Marion Powell stood in the entryway, elegant in a simple suit, her silver hair pulled back in a practical knot. Behind her were several women Thea recognized as board members of Haven House, the shelter organization that would now own and operate the property. Of course, Thea welcomed them, extending her hand. "I was just taking a last walk through. The house feels ready for its next chapter." Marion smiled warmly. "What you're doing is extraordinary. Do you know how rare it is for a shelter to have a property of this quality? Most operate in converted office buildings or cramped facilities with minimal outdoor space. My grandmother would have loved this," Thea said simply. She believed in creating safe spaces for people to rebuild their lives. That's what this house has always been meant for. As the women toured the property, discussing renovation plans to accommodate multiple families while preserving the historic character of the house, Thea felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was how the story was meant to end, not with her clinging to the past or seeking further retribution, but with something genuinely good emerging from the ashes of betrayal. The signing ceremony was brief but meaningful. Thea formally transferred ownership of the house, grounds, and a maintenance endowment to Haven House, ensuring that the property would serve its new purpose for decades to come. The attorneys had structured the donation with a stipulation that the house must always be used as a safe haven for women and children in crisis, or the ownership would revert to a trust Thea had established in her grandmother's name. As photographers captured the moment of the official handover, Thea glanced out the window and noticed a familiar car slowly driving past the house. Elizabeth, alone behind the wheel, watching the proceedings from a distance. Their eyes met briefly across the lawn, and Thea saw something unexpected in her mother's expression, not resentment or anger, but a flicker of what might have been understanding. The moment passed quickly as Elizabeth drove away, but it left Thea with the sense that someday, perhaps years from now, there might be room for a different kind of conversation between them. Not reconciliation exactly, but acknowledgement of the truth that had been buried beneath years of complicated family dynamics. After the ceremony, as the board members departed and workers began bringing in supplies for the first phase of renovations, Thea stood in the garden with Marion, watching the activity transform the house into something new. I understand from Ava that you've been living in a studio apartment since you returned, Marion said casually. Have you thought about where you'll settle permanently? Thea smiled. I've been so focused on resolving the situation with the house and company that I haven't had much time to think about it. But yes, I'll be looking for a more permanent home soon. Well, if you ever want to see how the old place is doing, you'll always be welcome here, Marion assured her. This house will remember you, even as it shelters others. Remember. The word echoed in Thea's mind as she drove away from the property for the last time, heading toward the publishing company offices downtown. There had been moments during her year away when she'd feared forgetting the details of the house, the exact pattern of light through the stained glass in late afternoon, the particular creak of the third stair from the top. Now she understood that those memories weren't tied to ownership, but had become part of who she was, regardless of where she lived. The following week brought an unexpected message from Ava. Brianni Reynolds had launched a live stream from the motel room where she and her father were temporarily staying, apparently intending to update her remaining followers on her plans to rebuild her influencer career. Instead, the broadcast had captured the moment when management delivered an eviction notice for non-payment, forcing Brianni to end the stream abruptly as she was asked to leave the premises. Karma really does come for everyone eventually, Ava noted when she and Thea met for dinner that evening. I had nothing to do with that, Thea pointed out, though she couldn't entirely suppress a smile. That's just the natural consequence of building your life on lies. Speaking of natural consequences, Ava continued, the DA's office is considering pursuing charges against Gerald for the forgery attempts on your property documents. They've asked if you want to make a formal statement. Thea considered this as she sipped her wine. A year ago, she might have jumped at the chance to see Gerald face criminal charges. Now the idea seemed exhausting and unnecessary. I think they've suffered enough consequences. I've reclaimed what's mine. The company is thriving under new management. The house is serving a better purpose. Pursuing criminal charges won't add anything meaningful to that. Ava studied her friend with open admiration. You've changed, you know. A year ago I was worried about you, about what all this betrayal might do to you. But you've emerged stronger, more centered. I had good examples, Thea replied, thinking of her grandmother's journals, the quiet strength that had guided Alina through her own life challenges. And I had time to figure out who I wanted to be on the other side of this. 2 days later, as Thea was leaving a meeting with the creative team at Marlowe Publishing, her assistant handed her an envelope that had been delivered by courier. Inside was a small brass key on a familiar leather fob, along with a handwritten note in her mother's distinctive script. This was your grandmother's key to the boathouse at the lake property. I kept it when everything else was sold after she died. It should be yours now. Some legacies shouldn't be broken, even when everything else falls apart. The lake property had been sold years before, during Thea's childhood, a vacation home that had been in the family for generations, but that Elizabeth had convinced Alina to sell during a financial downturn. The key was useless now, a relic of a place Thea barely remembered, yet its return felt significant, like the closing of a circuit. That weekend, Thea drove out to the coast, to a small beach town where she and her grandmother had often spent summer days when Thea was young. She walked along the shore until she found a quiet spot away from the weekend crowds. From her pocket, she took the key, studying its worn surface one last time before drawing her arm back and throwing it as far as she could into the ocean waves. It wasn't an angry gesture, but a releasing one. The key would find its own path now, perhaps washing up on some distant shore or settling into the sand below, becoming part of a landscape larger than any single family's drama or pain. On her way back to the city, Thea stopped at a small cafe to grab coffee for the drive. As she waited for her order, she noticed a young woman at a nearby table, surrounded by textbooks and visibly stressed as she tried to study while her phone continuously buzzed with notifications. "Excuse me," the woman called to Thea, having noticed her watching. "Would you mind taking a quick photo of me with these books? My mom keeps texting to make sure I'm actually studying for finals." Thea smiled and obliged, taking the phone and capturing an image of the young woman with her study materials. As she handed the phone back, she noticed the book on top of the pile, a tattered copy of one of Marlowe Publishing's most successful titles from years earlier. "That's a great book," Thea commented. "One of my favorites. It's for my women's studies class," the young woman explained. "We're analyzing how female authors in the 1990s portrayed power dynamics in families. Pretty relevant to my actual life right now, honestly." "How so?" Thea asked, intrigued. "Oh, just the usual family drama. Mom remarried, stepdad has different ideas about everything, suddenly the rules all change." The young woman shrugged. "You know how it goes." "I do actually," Thea replied softly. "Any advice?" the young woman asked with a wry smile. "Since you seem to have survived adulthood." Thea considered her response carefully. "Remember that your story belongs to you, no matter who tries to rewrite it. And sometimes the strongest move isn't fighting back, it's building something better right beside the ruins." The young woman looked surprised, then thoughtful. "That's actually really good advice. Thanks." As Thea drove home, she found herself thinking about that brief encounter, about the endless cycle of family conflicts and power struggles that shaped so many lives. Her own story wasn't unique in its betrayal, only in how she had chosen to respond to it. Back in her apartment, Thea opened her laptop to find an email from Marion. Attached were photos of the first family to move into the newly renovated Haven house, a mother and two young daughters settling into what had once been Thea's childhood bedroom. Their faces were blurred for privacy, but their body language told a story of relief and cautious hope. Beside her computer sat a small box containing the only items Thea had kept from her grandmother's house: the leather journal, a few photographs, and a simple silver bangle that Alina had worn every day of her adult life. Thea slipped the bracelet onto her wrist, its familiar weight a reminder of continuity amid change. Her phone buzzed with a text from Mara in Seattle. "How's life as a publishing magnate treating you? Still satisfied with your revenge tour?" Thea smiled as she typed her response. "It wasn't about revenge. It was about remembering who I am." And that, Thea realized, was the truth she had been searching for since the night she stood in the rain with her belongings in a duffel bag. She hadn't needed to destroy her betrayers with fire or fury. She had simply needed to remember that she had always been the one with the keys, the one with the power to close old doors and open new ones. As evening fell, Thea opened the balcony door of her apartment, listening to the sounds of the city below. Tomorrow would bring new challenges at the publishing company, decisions about manuscripts and marketing strategies, the ordinary business of building a future. But tonight, she would simply exist in the knowledge that her grandmother's legacy lived on, not just in buildings or businesses, but in the quiet strength that had seen Thea through her darkest moment and into the light on the other side. In her pocket, she found a postcard she had purchased at the beach that afternoon. On the back, she wrote a simple message, addressed it to Brianni's last known location, and set it aside to mail in the morning. Just 4 words that contained everything she needed to say: "This house remembers me."